librarians from the Launchpad at Indian Trails Public Library. Today I'm bringing you a tutorial about how to make your own infinity apron. This tutorial is a modified version of an infinity apron tutorial you can find on our Creative Bug database. If you'd like to make the version that has a pocket, I recommend you check out our Creative Bug database using your Indian Trails Public Library card. If you don't have an Indian Trails library card, check with your home library to see if they also offer access to Creative Bug. Creative Bug is a wonderful service that offers tutorials about all kinds of different making activities. Everything from drawing and painting, to cake making and decorating, to knitting, sewing, and more. You're guaranteed to find something that interests you. To stay up to date on what's happening at the Indian Trails Library, make sure to visit our website at itpld.org and our event calendar to see what's coming up. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well to be notified when we post new videos, and also make sure you visit our archives of videos to see other great programs, classes, and tutorials that we've posted in the past. I hope you have a great time watching and sewing along with this video, and happy making! Bye! To sew your own infinity apron, you'll need a sewing machine, cotton, linen, or denim fabric cut to the correct size, 44 inches by 40 inches for a bust size up to 44 inches, or 48 inches by 40 inches for a bust size 45 inches and up. You'll also need two lengths in a matching or contrasting fabric cut to 5 inches by 30 inches for the smaller size, or 5 inches by 36 inches for the larger size. Next, you'll need thread, a sewing gauge or a ruler, a loop turning tool like a bodkin or chopstick, pins or clips, I used both, sewing scissors or thread snips, and finally, you'll need an iron and iron-safe surface, just like this ironing mat or an ironing board. Before you begin, your fabric should have been washed and pressed. Our first step is to find the top of your apron. This will be one of the long sides of your piece of fabric. Depending on how you cut your fabric, the top side may be raw, and the opposite side may still have an intact selvage edge, like this one. For some fabric, the selvage may have text or writing on it, so you may want to trim that off. If your selvage edge doesn't have text like this, you can leave it intact for later. Another thing to note is that depending on your fabric, it may have a right and wrong side. When I say right and wrong side, I mean some fabrics will have a definite side that you want people to see, like this darker printed side. And the wrong side will be lighter and the side you don't intend to be seen. Now we'll flip our fabric so the wrong side is facing up and stretch it out. If you don't have a right or wrong side, choose the side you don't want showing to face up. We'll be working along one of the longer edges, which will now be the top of the body of our apron. Using a seam gauge or ruler, I'll fold the top of my fabric over approximately 1/4 of an inch. It may be a little more than that, but don't worry. Since this isn't a fitted garment, a little bit more than the 1/4 inch won't ruin our final product. Once you've folded a portion of the edge over 1/4 inch, you'll want to use your iron to press that edge flat. You'll keep moving along your edge, folding, measuring as needed, and pressing until the whole edge is folded over. Now that we've finished pressing our 1/4 inch fold, we're going to scooch our fabric back to the beginning of this side we've been working on, making sure that it's lying nice and flat. This time we're going to fold the edge of our apron over about 2 inches, once again using your seam gauge or ruler to measure. Fold your edge over, measure that it is approximately 2 inches. For this step, you'll need your pins, or you'll want clips to secure the edge down and prepare it for sewing. Press the edge down with your iron, and using your pins or clips, secure this edge in place. Continue to measure up the edge, pressing and clipping or pinning until you reach the end. Now that we've finished folding, pressing, and pinning the edge, it's time to head to our sewing machine. Before we begin sewing, let's talk about our seam allowance, or how we'll line up our fabric so we're sewing the right distance from the edge of the fabric. Some machines with a faceplate like this have seam allowances written on them. We'll be going for a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is the line between the 1/8 and 3/8 inch marks here. Some machines also have a clear presser foot that shows you where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is. If you don't have this, I recommend using some masking or painter's tape. You can tear off a piece of tape and line it up with the 1/4 inch seam allowance line so you are able to know where to line up the edge of your fabric when you're sewing. And now we're ready to sew. Now that our top edge is pressed, it's time to sew. Line up the top edge of your apron fabric for the 1/4 inch seam allowance. You do not need to do a back stitch at the beginning or end of sewing on the top edge. We'll be finishing the sides of our apron later, which will lock those stitches in place. Lower your presser foot and needle and begin to sew down the edge. If you're a newer sewer, you can take this at a nice, easy, slow pace to keep it lined up with the appropriate seam allowance. If you're confident, you'll probably zip right on through. Just keep sewing and removing your pins or clips as you go until you reach the end. Now that we're finished, lift the needle and presser foot and trim the thread. We'll take this fabric back to the beginning where we'll be sewing the bottom edge where we had the 1/4 edge fold we pressed earlier. Cut any excess threads with your snips or scissors. This time, we're going to line up the left side of our presser foot with the edge of the bottom fold. And then we'll sew all the way down this edge, keeping our fabric as straight and flat as possible. There's no need to force and pull your fabric. Just use your hands to guide it, and the feed dogs will do the work of pulling it along for you. Now that we're done, go ahead and take your fabric out, snip any loose threads, and then it's time to move to working on the bottom of the apron. Now it's time to sew the bottom edge of our apron. Like I said earlier, if you have a nice selvage edge with no text like shown here, you don't have to complete this step since the edge is already finished and you don't have to worry about fraying. If you do have a raw edge or need to hide text along your selvage, or just want a rolled edge like you have at the top, then let's keep going. To create our rolled edge on the bottom of our apron, you'll need your seam gauge or ruler again. For this edge, we'll be going for a 3/8 inch fold. Using your gauge or ruler, fold your edge over and check that it is 3/8 of an inch. Then you'll fold this edge over one more time. You should have a double fold that is 3/8 of an inch wide. Continue working up the side with your double fold, checking periodically that the width is still approximately 3/8 of an inch. Just like when we were working the top of our apron, you can press the edge and pin or clip it in place as you go. We'll continue doing this all the way along the bottom of our apron, creating a double fold and giving us a nice, clean edge. With our final clip in place, we're ready to go back to the sewing machine. With our edge pressed, we'll go ahead and sew the bottom of our apron down, sticking with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just like the top, you don't need to worry about backstitching at the beginning or end. Once you reach the end, cut your thread. Make sure you go back and snip those loose thread ends. Now we're ready to move on to our next step, finishing the sides of the body of our apron. Now that we've finished the top and bottom of our apron, it's time to finish the raw edges on the side of our apron. Like with the bottom of our apron, we'll be doing a double fold of our edge, this time going with approximately a 1/4 inch. Fold over your edge, using your gauge or ruler to measure a 1/4 inch, then fold again. Continue this process, pressing and pinning or clipping periodically until you finish the whole side. Now that you've finished this side, you'll repeat the same process on the opposite side. When you finish that on your own, come back and we'll be ready to sew down our sides and finish the body of our apron. With both sides of our apron pressed and pinned into place, it's time to sew the sides of our apron. We'll stick with our 1/4 inch seam allowance. This time you'll want to do a back stitch at the beginning and end of each side to lock those stitches in place. Once you've finished sewing this side, go ahead and sew the opposite side. Make sure to trim any of those loose threads. The body of your apron is now finished, and it's time to move on to sewing our straps. Now it's time to sew the straps for our apron. We won't need any pins or pressing for this part. You'll need one of the long rectangles of fabric with the right side of the fabric facing up. To start your strap, fold the top of one of the long edges down to the opposite edge, so the right side of your fabric is touching. Do your best to line up the edges at the top, shorter edge, and along the side, the longer edge. We'll begin our sewing along the top edge. Before you begin, make sure the edges are flush and the right side of the fabric is touching evenly. Check this along the length of your strap. Now we can sew our strap using the 1/4 inch seam allowance as our guide. To begin, we'll want to use a back stitch. Then we'll sew until we're about a 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Making sure your needle is down, lift the presser foot so you can turn your fabric. Lower the presser foot and check that the edges of your fabric are still flush. From here, you can finish sewing down the long side of your strap, stopping periodically to check that the edges are still in line. When you get to the end of the strap, finish with a back stitch. At this point, our strap is a tube of fabric with an open end. The reason we've left one end of the tube open is so we can turn it right side out. To turn your strap right side out, you'll need a turning tool like a bodkin or a chopstick. Find the closed end of your fabric tube, making sure to trim any excess thread. Take one of the ends of your turning tool and press it into the bottom of the tube you've sewn. You'll want to tug the sides of your tube down around the tip of the turning tool, and then you'll be able to shimmy the rest of the tube down the turning tool. The fabric will gather like this until you reach the end. Use the end of the turning tool to push the corners of your strap out. Remove the turning tool and finish pulling your fabric so your strap is right side out. Repeat this process with the second piece of strap fabric. Once you've completed that, we'll finish up our straps so they're ready to be attached to the body of our apron. Now that you've finished sewing and turning both of your straps, it's time to press them so they're easier to work with. We'll start pressing from the closed end of the strap. As you work your way down the strap, press the folded edge and pull at the seam and flatten with your fingers before pressing the seam flat with your iron. Continue this process, pressing the whole length of your strap. Once you've completed your first strap, repeat the pressing process on your second strap. Now that our straps are pressed, we need to finish the raw edge and close the opening in our strap. Take the open side and with your fingers, press the edges down and in approximately 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, tucking the raw edges inside the strap. This doesn't need to be perfectly precise. Press the edges together with your fingers, pulling and tugging as needed to make it as straight as possible. Now that the edges are tucked in, we'll take it over to the sewing machine and begin sewing along the top edge of our strap, using the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance as our guide. As you begin sewing, make sure to backstitch along this edge. You'll sew along this side until you are approximately 1/4 of an inch from the end, then stop. Leaving your needle down, lift the presser foot and turn your work. Lower the presser foot and sew along this longer edge. Continue the process, stopping to turn your fabric as necessary until you've sewn around the whole perimeter of your strap, making sure to backstitch at the end. Trim any loose, excess threads. Then repeat the sewing process with your second strap. Once your second strap is finished, you'll be ready to attach your straps to the body of your apron. Now that our straps are finished, it's time to attach the straps to the body of our apron. Let's unfold our apron, keeping the wrong side up. The first thing we need to do is find the center of our apron. To do that, fold and match up the sides of your apron. Find the crease in the top. This is the center of your apron. Go ahead and take a pin to mark the center point. Unfold and lay your apron flat again. We want our straps to be about 7 inches apart. Taking your seam gauge or ruler, half of 7 inches is 3.5 inches. Line the 3.5 inch mark up with your pin. Take your first strap and you'll line the left side of your strap up with 7 inches on your gauge or ruler, making sure that the side lines up flush with the ruler and the end of your strap is lined up with the bottom of the fold we sewed down earlier. Then with pins, secure your strap in place. Repeat this process with your second strap, making sure to line the right edge of the strap up with the left side of the ruler so the straps are 7 inches apart. Then pin your second strap in place. We're almost ready to sew the straps to our apron. To secure the straps to our apron, we're going to sew a square with an X in the middle. Because I want to make sure the design looks as clean and neat as possible, I'm going to flip the apron so we can sew the square and X on the front. Before moving to the sewing machine, repin your straps from the front and then remove the pins you added to the back. Now we're ready to begin sewing our square. Place the top of your apron where you've pinned the strap onto your machine. Make sure your fabric is flat and that any extra material from your apron and strap are out of the way. You'll want to start your seam as closely in line as possible with the seam on top of your apron and the seam on the side of your strap. It doesn't have to be exact or perfect. These are just some good guides for reference. Make sure to backstitch here at the beginning. We'll sew along this edge until we reach about where the seam is on this side of the strap. With your needle down, lift the presser foot and turn your fabric. You will need to bunch some of your fabric up to fit it in and through the machine as you sew the seam. Sew down this side until you meet the next seam. With the needle down, lift the presser foot and turn your fabric. This time we'll sew along this bottom seam until just about where we meet the side seam of our strap. You can use your seam gauge or ruler to check that the end of your seam is in line with the seam on the strap. To finish our square, lift the foot with the needle down. You should remove your pins before we sew this last side. Turn your fabric, then sew along this side until you meet the top seam of your apron. Now that we've finished sewing the square, we're going to turn our fabric so we can begin sewing our X. This time we want to sew from this corner of our square diagonally across to the other. Once you reach the corner, turn your work, this time sewing along the bottom seam again until you reach the next corner. Turn your fabric one last time. Now we'll sew from this corner diagonally across to the opposite corner. Once you reach this corner, make sure to do a back stitch and lock those stitches in place. Now you can remove your apron from the machine, cutting those threads. At this point, you can give your strap a nice tug, and you'll see it is now very securely attached to your apron. Remember to cut and clean up your loose threads. Repeat this process to attach your second strap to your apron. When you're finished, I'll show you how to attach your straps to the back of your apron. Now that both straps are attached to the front of the apron, it's time to attach the ends of our straps to the back. Flip your apron over, smoothing it out. Since the straps of our apron need to cross over, I'm going to start at one side of my apron, the left side, and taking the strap from the opposite side, the right, make sure to keep it straight as you pull it over. We'll attach it to the left side of the apron. If you were to attach your strap so the end is flush with the bottom of the fold, the straps would most likely be too long and your apron wouldn't fit properly. From my past experiences sewing this apron, I know 8 inches from the end of the strap to the top of the apron is about the length I need to make sure my apron fits properly. Using a ruler, gauge, or measuring tape if you have one, measure the approximate length you will need. I recommend 8 inches to get started. Pin this strap in place and repeat with your second strap on the other side. After pinning your straps, you should try on your apron. Then adjust the length of your straps depending on the fit you're looking for. Once you have your straps pinned in place, you can go ahead and sew these the same way we sewed the front straps with the square and the X. Once you've sewn both of your straps down, your infinity apron will be finished and ready to wear. To put on your infinity apron, place your hands in the circle created by the straps, putting this over your head. Then slip your arms through the side straps. Pull and straighten your straps into place. These will crisscross across your back. Now you're ready to begin your next cooking project. Thank you for sewing with me. I hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to share your project on social media. Tag #ITPLDmade so we can see your finished product.